Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the masterclass on how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting on the world of work in the public service. I just want to check with Marty at the venue. Are we ready?
Yes, Denise, we're ready. You can go.
I can continue. The NSG Masterclass series provides us with a unique learning opportunity to engage with key and current areas in our work and to stimulate our thinking and motivate us into action to improve our practice of service to South Africa. This masterclass once again gives us the privilege to learn from two phenomenal South Africans who are willingly sharing their experience and nuggets of wisdom and knowledge with us. Please allow me to introduce our two speakers. I would like to introduce Ms. Shabalala, who is currently the Vice Principal, ICT and Chief Information Officer at the University of South Africa. She holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Cape Town and a master's degree in engineering business management from Warwick University. Prior to joining UNISA, she was an executive head of business development at Vodacom, having been to Microsoft as enterprise strategy advisor. She is also well schooled in government practices because she is a former chief information officer of the Department of Trade and Industry and was in the team involved in the setup of the Small Enterprise Development Agency, as we know it as SEDA, as an ICT senior manager. Ms. Shabalala is currently directing the digital transformation program of converting UNISA to a fully online distance university. In this month, just an indication of the phenomenal person in whose presence we are, in this month of International Women's Celebration, she has been recognized by IT Web and Brainstorm as the Chief Information Officer of the month in South Africa. Can we kindly give Ms. Shabalala a warm welcome in the hall, please? Thank you. Our second panelist is Ms. Tanya Cohen. Tanya is the coordinator of Public-Private Growth Initiative, a sector-based, sorry, I just want to move my screen. Tanya is a coordinator of the Public-Private Growth Initiative, a sector-based collaborative platform that mediates with government in removing inhibitors for economic growth, mobilizing employment and investment. The PPGI's focus on building public-private trust collaboration and linkages. Tanya is the former CEO of BUSA, which is the Business Unity South Africa, where she left an indelible mark through adopting an institutional and collaborative approach with other social partners. Tanya specialized in labor market policy and has served as chair of the CCMA governing body and as a commissioner at the Commission for Employment Equity. Her career highlights include negotiating the National Minimum Wage Agreement, Labour Relations Stability Accord, and Job Summit Framework Agreement in NEDLAC, as well as leading employers globally on the ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, general discussion titled Demographic Change and the World of Work. She is an attorney by profession and holds a BA, LLB, LLM from the University of Witwatersrand. Can we kindly give a warm welcome to Tanya? Thank you, colleagues. Without further ado then, can I please ask Ms. Shabalala to present for us the way that we will handle this masterclass this afternoon. We will provide each of the panelists an opportunity to present to us for 30 minutes each. And I would encourage participants, please, to post their questions to the panelists on the Q&A when you are logged in through Zoom or via the WhatsApp group if you are in the venue. Thank you, colleagues. Ms. Shabalala.
Good afternoon. Okay. As I've already been introduced, my name is Poppy Shabalala. I'm currently employed at the University of South Africa, responsible for information, communications, and technology. And I'm also the program director and program executive of the university's digital transformation towards an open distance e-learning institution. Allow me to start by giving thanks to the principal of the school, Mr. Busani Ngaweni, for the opportunity to share the UNISA experience of using technology to survive the lockdown. I also want to acknowledge the training and human resource development practitioners who are here today from all spheres of government and organs of state, the UNISA colleagues, friends, families, and ICT industry experts who are joining us online this afternoon in this conference in support of the experience that I will be sharing on capacitating the effort during the epidemic. Okay. At this stage, I think it's safe for me to say all protocols observed. The University of South Africa is over 145 years old. Not only is it the largest standing dedicated open distance learning in the world, it is also the largest open distance learning institution in the continent. It enrolls over 400,000 students in a particular year, comprising of students across the globe. In UNISA, we celebrate and graduate at a range of about 50,000 students in a single year. And I must safely say that that's almost a size of a normal university's enrollment. With confidence, I might say that half of the attendees here in this conference today are actually graduates of the university. On the story I have today, it was on the 26th of March, 2020, just a day after my birthday. And for those that missed to send me the presents on the 25th of March, it's still open. That's when the country was locked down with a hope of only about 21 days. Little did we know, a year later, we are still here. The impact felt by UNISA, like any other institution and other organization, and even the state organs, will be told in form of a story today. So for those who are at home, please grab a blanket, pour yourself coffee, and cuddle for attentively listening to this story. And to you in the conference, don't you dare sleep on me. UNISA had all its campuses and regional offices closed at the announcement of the lockdown with immediate effect. Unlike other institutions, UNISA was ready to showcase its muscle as a giant structured Odell institution. In all meetings of the university, the one word that was in everyone's lips was, how do we save the UNISA academic year? UNISA was determined to continue doing its business of teaching and learning, as well as also doing assessments during the lockdown period. This was made possible with students at home and staff also at home. The fortunate part about UNISA is that a year before the lockdown, they already had a blueprint that was clearly articulating how the university will look like when it is in full digital transformation. That blueprint was clear as well on the steps and the roadmap of how to get there. So when the lockdown hit us, it gave UNISA an opportunity to parachute the vision of 2030 into 2020, leveraging on the existing technologies that the university has had. Over 1 million assignments were submitted online by May in 2020, making it easy for these to be marked in time for the exams to start. One critical part was the readiness of students to do online exams. Imagine these were unrehearsed. No one was ready for such. And in the middle of a lockdown. Even though there were challenges in the first couple of exams that were done, but the old technology of UNISA stood fast and held and conducted and concluded successfully the exams of the mid-year and the year-end of online exams at the university. But now, what about the staff of the university during lockdown? Let's take note that as much as UNISA was an open distance learning university and it was operating most of its business online, but staff was still going to the office to do so. And suddenly, there is no opportunity for you to go to the office. The opportunity to go to the office has been removed. Over 70% of UNISA staff were actually using desktops, the ones that you can't take home, by the way. So we needed to rent on an emergency basis laptops, and is during lockdown, by the way. So laptops needed to be sent to people's homes during the lockdown. Fortunately, that ICT is classified as one of the essential services. So our partners were able to travel and drive throughout the country to deliver the laptops to for the staff to be able to work from home. This sounds easy now when we talk about it, but like most public servants, UNISA staff also doesn't want to be reached by office on their mobile lines when they're not in the office. And the habit of updating your physical address when you move houses is not yet perfected. So then we had a lot of staff that we could not reach because we didn't know where they are. This is where then the use of social media was very much appreciated, because we love to share and update our contacts on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. And this came very handy for us at the university to be able to track down some of these employees and deliver the laptops to them. Since most of the UNISA staff members are also students of the university, some of that were able to track it through when they access My UNISA for their study material, and also when they were submitting their assignments. With the already existing technologies, like the virtual point node, the VPN, collaborating tools like the Microsoft Teams, and cloud services, it was made easy for staff to work from home as if they are still in the office. To make life even more easier, in the latter part of 2020, UNISA rolled out soft calling capabilities that staff was allowed, or it made it easy for the staff to make voice calls at home on Microsoft Teams. And these calls were not limited. You could call anybody everywhere in the world. And you also could receive your calls and answer them on your laptop or on your mobile phone when somebody is phoning you from the office line. So it then made it easy that there are no calls that were not answered because staff members were sitting at home. Not that people didn't ignore calls. And we could see some of them with messages when you phone them that says, by the way, the university is on lockdown, we'll let you know when you can call us, even though they have the capabilities to answer calls at the time. But then, what about productivity during that time? To those at home, are we still together? Please don't overcuddle yourself. I still need you here.
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. A big challenge for managers with this new normal is the ability to performance manage your staff. In the office, a manager will walk around, checking who's not on their workstation, checking who's taking long breaks, checking who's chatting on the passages and not going back to their workstation, and reprimand them accordingly. But now that they are at home, how do you do that? How is that possible? We had this coming several times in our management meetings at UNISA, where ICT was asked to come up with solutions for managers to be sure that people are actually working at home. While appreciating the whole lot confidence on ICT suddenly, this is a matter that cannot be resolved by throwing ICT at it. For UNISA, ICT was able to provide for managers reports on how often a staff member has logged onto the network, how long they were connected on the network, how many emails they received, how many emails they opened, how many emails they responded to. But is this helpful if a manager wants to know if the staff was doing the work that they are supposed to do at the time that they were supposed to do it? I seriously doubt so. This new normal calls for a new definition of performance, of new policies, of new processes and procedures, and how to assign daily tasks. Gone are the days where we're managing arrival and knock-off time, when we're managing tea breaks and lunch breaks. There are, of course, different approaches for different sectors of business, where there are hard and soft targets that need to be measured differently for every employee. At different levels of organization and responsibilities assigned, sometimes just attending meetings could be a major part of your contribution, and you cannot be measured otherwise. Things must not change just now because you are working from home. So performance management in the new era requires a completely new mind shift. And I'm glad that I'm talking to the HRT practitioners in this regard. What does it mean to work from home? From an employee's point of view, working from home has proven to be the most difficult and the costly form of working. You need to have proper tools of trade. And not all organizations have actually grasped this and understood it for what it is. We spend a lot of time, and we're still spending a lot of time, even at UNISA, talking about whether giving staff data should be regarded as a basic need for them to perform their work. Many organizations are still seeing this as an incentive rather than a tool of trade. I guess the same issue of providing laptop to everybody in government is one of those that are still being debated, just as we debate our data staff matters at UNISA. What used to be regarded as a status and differentiator between low level and high level of employees in the hierarchy of the organization has now been made available to everybody. And it becomes a shock to most of the people that were taking it as a status. And by the way, they are the same people that must approve policies. Should I even talk about printing costs that you incur when you are working from home? Should I now build an office, or should I convert my bedroom or my lounge into an office for me to do UNISA work? What about furniture? These are the difficult decisions that employees go through when they are thinking about working from home. And some of them, with the difficulty of not having the proper space where you can be able to do proper work, they result in risking COVID and going back to the office. And the organization is not coming to the party for such. Basically, Every organization that is serious about enabling staff to work from home should ensure that the staff is provided with all the necessary tools of trade. And this will definitely require review of policies and some of the, what you call them, staff benefits. Another dimension is that now that I'm working at home, I'm basically on my own to fend myself and support myself. In the office, I will walk around or I'll call on a colleague nearby and say, hey, how do I find that send button and that icon that we normally use? And where is that push button for me to finish this transaction? Who do you ask when you are at home? If there is more technical help needed, you will call ICT and the technician will come over to your desk. And while they're busy sorting out your laptop, you go and talk to your friends and say, tell me when you're done. And that was easy. You never knew what was wrong with your laptop, but now they tell you it's fine, then you use it. Now that I need to do all the work of fixing my laptop myself at home, and sometimes with the lack of having a technician online, many a times this is becoming very difficult if I'm not at ease with the use of computers. And I get very frustrated. It has dawned, however, to most staff members that basic computer skills are no longer a luxury, but a necessity to perform one's duties. Companies should add computer literacy as a prerequisite to employment, especially for those who are earmarked to work from home. I will take a whole day if I start bringing to talk about work discipline, because some people are just used to that. If the manager is not around, the cat is out, whatever. I don't know what's the right saying there. Dr. Shezi will help me. But is that we were all watching. If the boss is not around, then we do the things that we normally do. But now you're at home. Can you do it the whole day? Because you know no one is looking at you. So it calls for self-discipline. What about self-drive? We all want to get promoted. We all want to get rewards. No one is looking at you now. So you decide whether you want that or not. And time management. These are skills that you require when you want to start working from home. The new 24-hour availability for meetings on Zoom, on Teams, is really not working for all of us. So you need to be able to take decisions on when you say no to those meetings that are being scheduled at 8 p.m. just because they know that you have the capability to work online, which would not have been done if I was in the office, because I would have told them that I've left the office and my laptop is in the office, so I can't access this meeting. But can anybody and everybody work from home? There's a serious wake-up call now that has come to most organizations. And it's actually a big and a rough stone to swallow by many organizations. The realization that not all staff members can actually do organizational work at home. And we never thought of that before. For office-bound employees, those that were having laptops or computers to work, it was easy. But what about field workers and general workers? With all the technology available, you cannot make a cleaner to clean the office from home. Unless you want to use a robot, and which is a story for another day, because this is not what we're here for. Even though there are technologies that are deployed for some of the field workers, it has become very clear that the ultimate value derived from such group of workers when they're working from home is so minimal. It is important for an organization to identify such group of employees early and determine impactful ways of how the service will still be delivered under those circumstances. But you must not take for granted that everybody in your organization can work from home. We have dependencies from working from home. With all technologies, with all policies and procedures in place, and the organization so ready to continue with business while employees are working from home, there are two dependencies. which are country, and I'm tempted to even say continent challenges and dependencies, and those are electricity and connectivity. UNISA took the initiative of providing data for staff and students during the exam period especially. With this, we still had students that could not write their exams, especially the May and June exams when it was still hard lockdown, because they were in areas where there is constantly load shedding and they cannot connect when there is no electricity. And others are in areas where there is no electricity altogether. So it doesn't help. Even though they had data provided, some were in areas where there is poor network coverage, and others were in areas where there is no network coverage altogether. This applied to some of our employees as well, especially those that are in the regional offices. UNISA has taken a decision to make this issue of connectivity its business, because it's affecting our business. Our customers, who are our students, our staff, they are affected by this. If we don't make it our business, no one will. So we have made it our business to ensure that there is adequate connectivity for staff and our students, UNISA students, by the way, anywhere they reside in the country. It's a project that we are busy with at the moment. I'm aware also that National Treasury is embarked on something similar through their RT15 project. And so let's remain hopeful, at least for the connectivity. I'm not going to say much about electricity. What have we learned during this period of lockdown? Key lessons learned from a UNISA, and for your consideration as well as you elevate your business continuity plans to survive the pandemic. Without a robust, reliable ICT infrastructure and integrated systems, working from home for any staff member will be a challenge. So you cannot continue doing the things that you were doing when you were having your server and your server so old that you can constantly go there, massage it and hug it for it to perform. There's no chance for doing that anymore. And the demand for IT services becomes high when people are at home. Many decisions are taken overnight during this period. So it requires a dynamic and strategic funding model, which is enabled by a responsive supply chain management process. I'm talking to the converted here. Tanya, our next speaker, will talk and elaborate more on the policies and procedures from a labor law point of view. I will not waste your time there. The new normal calls for advanced technical skills, like I've already said, across the organization. We needed to step to a level of hand-holding some of our lecturers during the exam period, because they were not up to scratch in as far as computing is concerned. We had to handhold them for successfully uploading assignments and question papers for the students to get them on the other side and be able to write exams. The same was the case with the students as well. Most of our students were struggling during this period, and more because of the inability to casually maneuver easily around the gadgets that they have been given. As a result, we had to form a team for the October-November exams that was sitting there online to assist the students during the exam period. Because now we realize that going online means that there's no invigilator that is walking around checking if your pen doesn't write anymore or you've run out of paper. You need to fend yourself. And these are the decisions that impacted some of the students from saying, I will miss this year, I'll try, probably there won't be a COVID next year, then I'll try again. As human beings, we are social animals. Being locked down in your house, even if with your family, without social interactions of your peers and other people that you used to socialize with for growth, has become a big toll, and it has become very difficult for most of us, even those who are introverts, those that were quietly sitting in the office, not saying anything to anybody. But when you're sitting all alone at home, you start missing the noise, you start missing the interaction with other people. So somehow, organization must find a way of creating that atmosphere that allows people to constantly interact with each other. With that, I'll want to say thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. And I hope that the story that I have shared has benefited you and will help you as you prepare for business survival, leveraging on technology for the future of your organization. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shabalala, for that really insightful information that you shared with us and your story and your case study. We will be holding the questions for now to Ms. Shabalala. As I suggested, once Ms. Cohen has spoken, then we can share all the questions. I just want to remind all the participants again that you can use the chat, the Q&A to post your questions as well as on the WhatsApp group. Ms. Cohen.
Working, is it? Is it on? Good, good. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry for that interruption. That's when technology lets you down, because I was trying to log on to get the Q&A and realized that I wasn't able to do so. But thank you very much for inviting me to be here this afternoon as well. I'm just waiting to see if the presentation is coming up. There we go. So I thought before we start that it would be very interesting to just reflect on that 1909, so it's over 100 years ago, quote from an author, E.M. Foster, who wrote about the future world. And you can read it. It sounds very much like the COVID world that we're used to. People on their own, in offices, interacting with machines, getting goods delivered to their homes rather than actually engaging with each other. And I think, everyone has spoken about how much COVID has changed what we are doing. But for today's purpose, we're going to look at the world of work, and we're going to look at what that means in terms of how do you interact as human resource practitioners. So there are three things that I think we must bear in mind. The first is, are these permanent changes, or are they just temporary issues that once people have been vaccinated and we've got herd immunity, some of our old practices are going to come back? The second is around the state of the economy pre-COVID, and whether or not COVID has created this opportunity for us to really change things significantly and propel us, particularly in an economy such as our own, which was to a large extent quite held back by a lot of our traditional practices, whether it has forced us into this future world of work permanently. And then I think the last thing is, are we geared for these changes in the way in which we structured, be it in the public service, be it in the private sector, informal sector? How do we actually take advantage of these changes and what it means for us? So I'm going to use, if we can go to the next slide, I want to use the framework from the ILO, International Labour Organization, which is an agency of the United Nations, and use that as a framework to look at the various aspects of how COVID has impacted on the world of work. And you'll see there's the rights at work, which really refers to things like basic conditions of employment, things like hours of work, your contract, your minimum conditions of employment. The second is around employment creation, and that speaks to both jobs and enterprises, and how do we create jobs and make sure people are employed. The third is around social security, so things like leave, things like pension, things like medical aid, health and safety. And the last is social dialogue, which includes things like how you engage with each other. It also goes as far as collective bargaining. And all of this is actually captured really well and if you haven't looked at it, I really do advise that you look at it. It's a very short document. The ILO's Centenary Declaration, it was entered into in 2019, just in time for COVID, and it was all around the future of work. And it was, how do we actually adjust? And when I say we, from an ILO perspective, it's governments, it's employers, and it's workers. So it's the tripartite constituents looking at actually how do we adjust to the future of work. And I must say, when that declaration was entered into, I don't think anyone had any contemplation that within a short year we would be actually working that way. But decent work has to be seen in a context. It's got to be seen in a context of productive employment as well. So the two go hand in hand. And it is key to achieving a fair globalization and to reducing poverty. And I think what you'll see throughout what I'm going to address you on is that you've got to always look at those two forces. One is productive work, the other one is decent work, and how do they work together? And I think the important thing is to realize that they are mutually reinforcing. They're not at odds with each other. They actually do reinforce each other. And they also speak to Goal 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals, because they are actually captured in the concept of Goal 8, which is around decent work and economic growth. Thanks. We can move to the next one. So there's two things. I know that the National School of Government a few days ago heard from Mariana Mazzucato around the mission-driven state. But I think that really you're looking at that, which is about service delivery. It's about enabling conditions. It's around how one is transformative in one's approach to be able to deliver to the mission. And it's about the productive work. It's around work that's focused, it's engaged, how people are strategically aligned around that work, and how they're skilled and capacitated to perform that work. And that all has to be seen as part of the whole productive work, the mission-driven state, and in the context of what is a capable, ethical, and developmental state, which I know you heard more about this morning. So it's really constantly what, as HR practitioners, you need to be bearing in mind at the back of your heads. Because I know when you're in that space, you tend to often get pulled into one direction or the other to say, you know, we've got to make sure that these rights are enforced, but sometimes forgetting that those rights are there to ensure that someone is productive. And how do you bring those together? So if we move now.
Tanya,
Yes? I'm wondering if I must pause there. It seems like the screen is hanging. I'm not too sure. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to speak to those 4 pillars of the decent work agenda, which comes out of the ILO, and speak a little bit about some of the things that Poppy has mentioned, but actually take them into a little bit more detail, because I think as HR practitioners, sometimes those are the areas that you're struggling with. So under rights of work, I think the first thing that we've got to recognize is that the contract of employment to a large extent has been based on time. It's been how many hours of work do you work? Where do you perform that work? And then everything flows after that. And what's happened in the last couple of months is that we actually are starting to realize that those type of contracts can't serve us any longer. So I think that you do have to start thinking about the wording of your contracts, because how many of you are employed on contracts that say you will report to this premises and your hours of work are from 8 till 5? Hands up. Yeah, a few, but not all of you. You're lucky, because a lot of employment contracts are actually phrased that way. And I think one of the biggest challenges that one has, not only as HR practitioners, but I think as management, is actually to challenge yourselves into how do you convert those time-based contracts into output-based contracts and KPI-based contracts. And that really forces you to ask the question, why is this person employed? What is the output that they're required to deliver? What are they required to do? And I found even myself in the space that I've been working in, like I've had to find different ways to account for my own time. I used to do a timesheet, and I used to record the meetings or the engagements that I used to be part of. I used to record sometimes like the things that I was drafting, but I've had to start thinking very, very differently about it. And in fact, what I do in the mornings now is I try and be very conscious and intentional about thinking about what am I going to deliver today, not what meeting am I going to sit in, or how many emails like I'm going to respond to. And that's not by any means an easy task. And I think even yourselves as HR practitioners, you need to be asking yourself that question: is what is the core essence of your job? What is your delivery? How do you measure it? And, that's the stuff that's actually really hard. And it's hard in the public sector, it's hard in the private sector, because it's different for different people, it's different for different roles, but yet you have to have a level of fairness and equity in terms of how you apply it. So one of the things, particularly where you've got a lot of people doing a similar type of role, is that you've got to actually spend the time and unpack what is the core essence of that role. What is the delivery that's required? If you've got someone who's in the audit function, is their job to present the numbers so that they can develop the annual reports? Or is it so that they can develop the annual reports without qualification? Is it that every 2 weeks or every month they've got to prepare the management accounts? Is it that the management accounts have to be accurate? What does accuracy mean? So you really do have to ask these questions. But I think the important part is that, first of all, if you do it once, you've got a really good foundation. The second part is that you've got to keep on improving it. But what it does do is it really focuses you in terms of what that person is meant to be doing. And it starts making it far much more easier to actually manage how the person actually performs and delivers in terms of their role. I remember in one of my previous roles where I was performing a management function, I found and recruited a really talented employee, and it was a new role. And I thought that I'd sort of outlined what that role was about. But the employee was absolutely insistent that I set out her KPIs before she started the work. And I remember sort of thinking, and we were all busy and it was rushed, and I remember thinking, oh man, but I did it because she was a very, very talented person, and I thought that it was a worthwhile exercise to do. It was probably the most important thing I think I did in terms of setting her up for success and setting the organization up for success, because she knew exactly what she was going to do coming into the role. I knew exactly what I expected of her, and it was the most excellent foundation. And I think that's what you've got to see this as. It's difficult to get to, but it's a foundation in terms of how do you move forward in terms of that relationship. It's even more difficult to do in the middle of a job, because that's what you're going to have to do now, is that you're sitting with people that have been there for a long, long time. But if you can transition from this hourly based or time-based contract into a performance output-based contract, you not only transform how that employment relationship works, you actually transform the output of what happens in that area of work. So I really encourage you to actually go through that process and do it deliberately. The other thing, and I know Poppy has touched on it a bit, but the thing about computers, access to data, access to stable electricity supply, you're going to have to draw on best practices in that regard. Hopefully you're going to get standardized policies that are going to assist you. But I really encourage you to look at what that does in terms of quality of work where people are working remotely, and also look at it in terms of, are there potentially savings that are coming out of transport expenses, commuting expenses, and seeing whether you can set those off against the costs of data, against the costs of maybe an inverter for load shedding, and obviously the cost of people having their own computers so that they can operate effectively remotely. One of the things that I've heard, which is quite disturbing for me, is that now that we're in level 1 of lockdown, is that a lot of employers, and particularly in the public sector, are saying, come back to work. And they're saying, you must come back full time. Like, don't even come back like on a rotational staggered basis. We want everyone back at work. And I have to ask why? Why do you need everyone back at work? Is it like, especially when there's still a health and a safety risk there? Is it showing more about the fact that you can't manage the person's performance remotely, or is it saying more about actually the nature of the work? Because if people have been working effectively for 8-9 months off-site, is that surely you can find new ways. And I think the one thing that's becoming very, very clear is that there are some people, and this is where the element of choice comes in, some people do actually prefer to work in the office. They have circumstances at home that make it very difficult. It might be an unstable internet connection. It might be that they've got a young baby that they find it hard to concentrate and they want to actually be in the office. And then the other way around is that there are people that actually feel that they're far more functional at home, they're saving a long commuting time, they're able to be there for childcare responsibilities. And we have this opportunity now to actually set people up for their best. And one of the things that HR practitioners need to be able to do is play that role of saying, how do you make people succeed and be at their best? How do you have them working in conditions where they can actually perform in their best possible way? So that's under the performance side. But I think that what's really important also is your role in helping management manage. Because a lot of management don't have the tools to manage performance and output. They've got the tools to manage time. They know how to walk around, as Poppy said, and see when people are not at their desks. But they don't know how to ask the questions around performance. And that's where that process of working with management and working with staff to actually understand what are the core performance areas for that role is absolutely invaluable. And then the other thing that I think you have to be doing quite carefully as HR practitioners is deciding at what stage do you actually change the contract of employment. Because if you've got those time-based contracts and location-based contracts, you've actually got to start changing them to reflect something that's more accurate in terms of the way we're working. Because, maybe the clause goes as follows, is that your ordinary place of work is the Radisson Hotel, but if for any reason you need to work remotely, then you will, then that is acceptable, provided it's agreed between management and yourself, or clauses like that. The other thing that's really important is that hours of work, 8 to 5, I don't know who's working 8 to 5 anymore. I don't work 8 to 5 anymore. I think I work much longer. I work sometimes on the weekends, but sometimes during the day, I'm not working from 8 to 5. And are you going to discipline people because they are not, available between 8 and 5? But then what are you going to do if they're available after hours? What are you going to do if they're not available after hours and there's an emergency? So you've got to actually fundamentally shift the culture of how work is done. And you've actually got to know what those principles are in your workplace, because if you haven't had those policies in place before, you're going to really struggle to manage them. Even I think of a disciplinary process is that used to happen on site. What happens if you need to now have a disciplinary hearing? And is it okay to have a disciplinary hearing on a Zoom call or MS Teams call? What does it mean to evidence? Because it used to be that evidence, if you went to the CCMA, you have to give it firsthand. Does giving it on a Zoom call mean that you now, is that secondhand evidence? What does it mean to the quality of the evidence? And I think what's really important is that if you are going through any type of, if it's a disciplinary process, a grievance process, an incapacity process, is that connection with the person becomes more and more remote. And you've essentially got an employment relationship there. And doing these sort of processes on digital and virtual chat rooms and devices is not necessarily a way in which the relationship gets preserved. It's far easier when people are working off-site to lose those points of connection. So it's a really, these are the types of challenges that I think as HR practitioners you need to get into. If you move now to the area of employment creation and jobs, it's in the next slide. Thank you. So employment creation, where that deals with both jobs and enterprise. But in the context of public service, I think that there's a few things that are absolutely essential. The one is around development. And if you're not taking this opportunity to use this both for yourselves and also the employees that you are managing as part of the human resource function, for lifelong learning, for development, for career shifts, for development of core skills, then that's a huge missed opportunity, because this is the time for that to happen. Not only basic computer skills that Poppy was referring to, and I've got a very funny story in that regard, which I just have to relate to you, is in the early stages of lockdown, we were working quite closely with a whole team of lawyers with Business for South Africa. And I remember we were busy populating and going backwards and forwards on the list of what are essential sectors. And there was a very capable lawyer who we were working with, who obviously very senior and very well established. And it was literally, I think, 2 days before the lockdown had happened. And he wasn't sending anything. He kept on saying, I'm going to send it. And he wasn't sending through the document. And eventually I spoke to him a few hours later, and he said to me, I just can't manage. He says, I don't have my PA, and normally she's there, and normally she's typing things for me, and I just don't know what to do. Because he was so used to having his PA in the next door office that he would dictate to, and the letter would be done. He actually could not function without someone to do that work for him. And I think, that's, the time is gone for that. But it's not only those core basic computer skills, the skills to be able to self-manage, to respond to your own emails. It's the skills around how do you actually transition your career? How do you learn new management capabilities? How do you learn new areas of work? Because there's so much opportunity opening up. And now is the way to do it far easier than one could before. So it's important. And I think the other thing that's important is that you need to actually look at what are some of those core skills that are going to make people resilient and capable in any role. And those core skills have changed, because before there might have been things like leadership skills or self-management skills. Now, to a large extent, some of those skills have shifted to things like problem solving, critical thinking. They're future world of work skills. And if you can actually start identifying those skills and start training them and practicing them, you have a far better chance of actually coping in this future world of work, and also helping others to do the same. And that's where agility comes in. And I think one of the things that public service hasn't been able to do effectively, but I think which you really need to challenge the system on, is around different types of contracting. It might be temporary work, it might be flexible work, it might be part-time work, but you want to actually be able to be agile enough, because now is the opportunity to actually employ people who want to work in a slightly different way. It might be you that wants to work in a slightly different way, and you're more productive that way. And hopefully, more and more you will be able to influence that those are standard types of policies and ways of working within the public service. Termination, I've spoken about in terms of the processes, but I think the thing that for me has been really striking and really unfortunate is that people who have been retired during lockdown have really not had processes that have afforded them dignity and celebration around their careers that they've had. I've heard of countless examples of people that haven't even had a sort of a farewell Zoom call. Like before, it used to be maybe a party, or people would go out and they would all go and have tea, or they'd go and have drinks and things like that. Now people are getting letters in the email that says at the end of this month, this will be your last salary and you will be retired off the system. We can't do that to people and we've got to find new ways of celebrating and exiting so that people can retire in dignity, they can leave in dignity. So if you are involved in processes, which no doubt you are, around people retiring, please try and celebrate it in some way. Please try and give dignity to the service that they've actually provided. I think leave is another area which has become quite tricky, and no doubt you've been dealing with that. Sick leave has become immensely tricky. There's, and we'll get on to more of that later, in terms of the termination processes, in terms of incapacity and things like that. But before I get there, the one thing that I do think is really important is, what is your role in terms of bringing new young people in and giving them experience? Because COVID has opened up a whole lot of opportunities in that regard that we didn't have before. Before you might have had to take someone into the office with you, you'd have to get permission, and then they get exposed to the work. Like now they can actually join the Zoom calls along with you, and they can actually be there and they can be participating. They can be trained in a very different way. And I think not only are they there to learn, but they add value because they are much more digitally savvy than a lot of us older people. They're able to actually navigate their ways around that, and they bring different things into the mix. The one example of the National Youth Employment Pathway Manager, where digital platforms have actually enabled youth, is the hiring of the 300,000 teaching assistants in the Department of Basic Education. Like those 300,000 teaching assistants were identified on the National Youth Employment Pathway Manager, which is a digital platform, and they were recruited, I think, in the space of a month. So from beginning of like the advert going out to them being placed in the schools took a month, and that was because they used a combination of digital and interviewing skills and recruitment skills. So it shows you how easy it is to mobilize that and to use that digital technology to actually bring people in closer, to give them access to employment and learning opportunities. If we move to the next area, which is around social security and social protection, and I'm going to jump into leave and then come back to well-being. With leave and sick leave in particular, I think that you've seen that sick leave was used not only for when the person was sick, to also some extent it was used when you had to isolate and someone else was COVID positive. So there's a whole lot of new employment law that's emerging there. And potentially it's even a form of incapacity, because it isn't that you're sick. It was actually that you can't go to work because someone else is sick and therefore you aren't able to attend. So there are different dynamics coming in there. I think in terms of maternity leave, to some extent, COVID has enhanced the opportunity for people who are having children to be with their children longer, because you've got the father and the mother who are working from home, and when that baby arrives and they're there for much longer. So sometimes it actually works in people's favor. But if you look at family responsibility leave, that's where the law is perhaps not and needs to shift, because the family is defined as such a small unit in terms of your parents, your spouse, or your children, that it actually has lost a lot of relevance, because that's maybe what should have been used for when you had to stay off work because someone in your family had tested positive or was sick with COVID. So I think that some of those things, almost COVID has forced us to actually have a look at whether that law is the right law. But how do you manage it from your own perspective is obviously you've got to look at the policies that are in place. And you've got to find that balance between productivity and between working conditions, because if you don't, you actually miss going completely the one direction or the other, which is not very helpful. In terms of well-being, I think you've all heard around how COVID and working from home puts you under different kinds of stress. Hours of work go out the window, you don't manage your time as well as you should. And I think you owe it to yourselves, but you also owe it to the people that are working in your areas to actually start putting in practice guidelines. It doesn't have to be firm rules, but put in practice guidelines for what is healthy work, what is reasonable work hours, what type of rest, and the basic conditions of employment and your conditions of employment provide very good guidance in that regard. People, they say, should have 36 hours of rest a week, continuous. You should have at least 10 hours overnight where you're not working. And sure, that doesn't happen every single day, but you must try and instill those practices and reinforce that that's part of being healthy. Should be encouraging people to exercise, encouraging them to spend time in terms of social activities, and really finding some balance, because it's emotionally and it's physically draining working in this way, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, because they say that the extroverts struggle when they're sitting on Zoom because they don't have people to engage with. The introverts struggle because sometimes they're asked to speak and they don't really want to speak, whereas in the physical environment, they are able to actually sit back a little bit more. So these are all things that people are dealing with. Health and safety, I hope that you really are watching those processes, because that's also where the law guides us, the risk processes that are in place in terms of how do you keep on evaluating risk in the workplace, because that is changing constantly with COVID. And I think we're learning constantly different things. You know, in the beginning of the lockdown, there was a huge emphasis on sanitizing and cleaning surfaces. We've learned that actually what's far more important now is social distancing and wearing masks. It's shifting. The fact that vaccinations will be taking off pretty soon in like, I think they're saying the date now is around May, June, might mean that it brings in a whole new set of health and safety risk considerations that aren't currently applicable. So the thing that you need to do in your workplace is obviously make sure that those risk committees are operational, make sure that you're convening them, make sure that you're discussing them, making sure you've got best practice in terms of health and safety. And in some respects, I think COVID has actually done us a bit of a service, because what it means is that these health and safety committees are actually functioning for the first time with a level of prioritization that they should, because they were always one of those compliance committees that never got that much attention. They're actually one of the most important committees that you have in the workplace. So make sure they work, make sure they've got minutes, make sure they're properly constituted. And then I think incapacity is going to change, because the nature of incapacity now includes, like I've said, people not being able to report to work because someone in their household is sick. But other forms of incapacity are people with comorbidities, people who are older, and they might not be able to come to work because of their own condition, or because they might put someone in their household at risk. So that becomes a form of incapacity, and I think that you have to manage that quite sensitively, but I think particularly in the public service, where you're dealing with public services, is that you can't indefinitely keep people on the payroll if they're not presenting themselves for work. You're going to actually have to try and accommodate them in another way. You're going to have to enable them to work remotely. But if they can't, then you actually can't be continuously employing the person in a way that they can't deliver services. If you move to the last area, and I'll spend a little bit of time on social dialogue and then wrap up, is that I think that there's things that have been fundamentally changed around how we operate with COVID in terms of our communication and engagement processes. And I think whether you are operating in the private sector or the public sector, or even in the non-profit sector, where we failed ourselves fundamentally is around communication and engagement. Because you might not be able to meet in big rooms, you might not be able to have your traditional sort of trade union engagements, you might not be able to have your social engagements. But what you have now is digital platforms that really can connect you. You have WhatsApp groups, you have closed groups on Facebook, you have all these different mechanisms that can connect people, and in an amazing way. So use those technologies, because as an HR person, one of the things that is really important is how do you connect people. Linda Grattan, I don't know if has anyone read about Linda Grattan? She's a professor at London Business School. She writes about the democratic organization and how does that work? Because in the old days, you used to have like one building and everyone was working in one building and they would have lifelong careers. So they would combine with values because they were all working in a physical space, and there was almost a corporate identity, or there was a government identity with that department, and you all sort of grew up together and you worked together. Now, with businesses working all over the place and supply chains and things like that, what unifies people? And the same question you can ask in COVID, what unifies people? Because you're all working in different locations, and there's one thing that it's a unity of purpose and a unity of values that actually keeps you together. But if you're not conscious about it and you don't find ways to actually reinforce that and engage about it and make sure that people in your workforce are doing that, then you actually are missing that opportunity. And that's the glue that holds you all together. So find those common threads, spend the time in terms of interrogating what is your vision, what is your mission, what are you there for as a government department, and how do you bring people together? And then I think collective bargaining, we've got a way to go. I think this is one of the areas where South Africa, we've been very traditional in terms of how our collective bargaining happens. We're bargaining to a large extent in the same mode we did in the early 1980s and 1990s. We haven't really transformed that. And really, if you digitally enable collective bargaining, you could deal with things like the strike ballot so much easier. You could be dealing with how do you get feedback? You know, you ask employees, like if your union is operating like it should, they can go there and say, what's more important to you? To have a higher pension fund contribution or a higher medical aid contribution, or do you want more leave? It makes these things all of a sudden really easy. And I encourage you from a human resource perspective to actually try and enable your union partners to do that, but also enable yourselves so that you have your fingers on the pulse in that regard. And use these digital platforms to engage with people and to get feedback and do temperature checks, because you're not going to get it any other way in the days of COVID. So in closing, I think there's a few things that one wants to look to. These are the capabilities and things that I think you all want to try and promote as much as possible. Digitization, capacity building, that common vision, how do you coordinate and connect and build trust in these times of COVID, and how do you have a transformative and adaptive culture? I've left you some reading material because I think that they both are really good texts. The one is by Linda Grattan that I referred to. The other is by a person called Philippe Christian Dicuna. I don't know how you pronounce it properly. He wrote about the trust economy, and he speaks about the fact that we have all this trust in digital tools. We will go online and we will order something online and provide our credit card tools details. But if someone stops us on the street and says, I have a product, give me your credit card details and I'll sell it to you, we won't do that. But yet we have this trust in digital technology that's almost disproportionate to what we should have. But the underlying purpose of it is how do you actually build trust? Because when you've got trustworthy relationships, things work so much easier. And the reason I mention why trust is important in this context is that if you can't develop the fundamentals of maintaining and building that trust with your workforce during times of COVID, then you're on a losing path. You've got to find a way in terms of connecting with your workforce, building that trust. And I think some of the things that Mariana Mazzucato has also referred to are some of the fundamental shifts that she speaks about. So it's things like from outsourcing to capacity building, from picking winners to moving to picking the willing, from looking at cost benefits to now looking at dynamic spillovers. All those types of things are how you're going to have to play a transformative role. And finally, I think, the start is with you, is that you can't transform outwards if you don't transform inwards. You've got to start working on yourself first, and actually demonstrate as HR practitioners what you are trying to sell to those that you're working with. And for me, fundamentally, that comes back to those 4 areas in terms of how do you partner with others to deliver, how do you connect with others, how do you innovate, and how do you adapt and learn and grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you, Ms. Cohen and Ms. Shabalala. I'm going to go through the questions that have been posted on the question and answer chat. And we have also given you, both of you, access to the WhatsApp group, so you would be then able to pick up the questions on the WhatsApp group. To start off the questions and some comments, I would really like to start off with a comment that I found very profound in the question and answer set here. It comes from Cindy Jacobs, and she says, working from home is great for me as I am a visually disabled lady and was grateful to work from home for safety reasons, standing in the dark at a bus stop. It becomes lonely, but I am productive. I am more accurate on my work and creative. I don't have to wear my headset because it's less headache. I have learned to fix my laptop. I even sometimes wear my office clothes. And it just captures the consciousness that we have to have, that both of you spoke about when we work from home and quite dispersed. And I would like to maybe in your comments later in your response, talk about the whole notion of inclusivity when we talk about the use of ICT in our workplace and also working from home. I would want to also then run through the other questions, please. From Lasiba. Kindly, I think this is for Ms. Shabalala. Kindly advise on the proper coordination of training interventions using the technology from HRD perspective. Then I have another question from Lasiba. Strategic direction, enabling structures, enabling systems, and organizational culture. All of these must be integrated. Kindly advise on how to implement this in the new normal of work. I'm going to do 5 questions to the panelists and then ask them to respond. Question number 3, or With regards to performance contracting, and I think this is to Tanya, most of the line managers do not define performance standards. As a result, it's difficult during performance reviews to score appropriately. Your advice, please. And then for Ms. Shabalala, would UNISA consider pure online tutoring and examinations in the future? And then I'm also just going to, whilst I am with Ms. Shabalala, I am also just going to give you another question, please, Ms. Shabalala. It seems UNISA has introduced lots of artificial intelligence. What are the implications in terms of staff establishment? Have you let some of your staff go, in brackets, retrenchments, during this time? I will ask Ms. Shabalala to respond first to her set of questions and also to maybe just the comment from the first comment about inclusive HRD management and HR management, and then Ms. Cohen. And then I will raise the next 5 questions. Thank you, Ms. Shabalala.
Thank you very much. I've been trying to write quickly some of the questions. There's one that I've missed, the one from Lisiba. I think I'll ask you to come back with it again. I'll start with the one from, yes, thank you, from the one that is about artificial intelligence, and if UNISA did lay off people in form of retrenchment during this period. The answer is no, and definitely not. What artificial intelligence has been used for is actually for the mundane, repetitive tasks that artificial intelligence brings about efficiencies on. It also assists us with data manipulation. We have a lot of data from our students, and for quick and accurate decision making, because if all this was done manually, it would take a long time, and sometimes there's errors in that regard. So we are not using artificial intelligence to replace existing capabilities of the university. No one was retrenched, like I said, due to the artificial intelligence introduction. We need more staff for the new way of working. There are jobs transformation, of course, at play at UNISA. We are looking for more skills and that will be able to work easily on the new way of working in our digital environment. So we have a talent and culture work stream as part of the program that is running the digitization, that is looking at how we retrain, reskill, upskill, cross-skill, whatever you want to call it, for our staff to be the same people that will then be able to take on the new roles that will be available. So we actually need more new skills, and the project of skilling and upskilling is going to assist us in that regard. There is no intention for anybody to be laid off by the use of technology. Remember, technology is there for us to abuse and not the other way around. On the other one of pure online tutoring and exam, I notice as well from the group that I have UNISA employees in the midst of the online, and some of them were already answering the questions, which I very much appreciate. That one was already answered by Moses Sekhayeju from ICT, saying that yes, UNISA is considering pure online tutoring and examinations. We have done this with our 2020 exams from May, June, as well as October. And we are taking a project where we are rolling out fully digitized teaching and learning through a new system of Moodle that we are installing. And as I speak now, tomorrow I'll be launching the full digitization of one of our colleges, the School of Business Leadership, SPL, is going fully online tomorrow. So there is a lot movement in as far as us doing in that way. So in quick answer, yes, we are going online, and we would like to have all our services on teaching and learning online as a university. The one on inclusivity on ICT in workplace, we have a very robust ethics and transformation committee at UNISA, and one of them headed by the principal of the school, Mr. Ngaweni. And a bigger focus is on inclusivity around people with disability, because we do push a lot in that regard. So we do have technologies in ICT that caters for such. We do have a department in the university that deals specifically with people with disability, and we constantly are getting requests from them on the different technologies that can be used in this regard. And I must say that I can relate quickly with the comment that came through from one of the respondents in terms of the people with disability are actually much happier with us working from home, because then they don't have to deal with all the challenges where our organization is not ready to accommodate them. So from a technology point of view, they've been happy to continue in that regard, because we have been able to provide them with the tools that they need in this regard. And we're constantly reviewing such, because there's new technologies every time for better way of doing work for them in the university. And I think I will ask for that other question to be articulate again. I missed it, the one from Lisiba. Dennis?
Sorry, I'm just reading the one for you, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Oh, mute. That happens. Thank you.
No, sorry. With regards to performance contracting, most of the line management do not define performance standards. As a result, it's difficult during performance reviews to score appropriately. Your advice, please. And whilst you're there, Ms. Shabalala, I just saw one from Karen Swart as well, which is in the same line. It is important, as mentioned, to have clear work plans with KPA and KPI, and not just for the quarter, but weekly if needed. This push for delivery. The challenge is, as mentioned, who pays for the Wi-Fi or internet cost? How will funds for public servants be made available so that departments issue all with laptops? Departments' funds were cut during the financial year and keeps on being cut. So not sure how funds will be made available. Maybe you can relate to us from the UNISA point of view. Thank you, Ms. Shabalala.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I know I'm being thrown under the bus here for some of the questions. Because these are the discussions that we constantly have within our organization as well. And these are discussions that becomes very difficult when you're having them with a CFO whose mandate is to make sure that money is managed accordingly, and ICT always being seen as a spender than anything else. But I think at this stage, we have reached a point where it's not a question anymore that we need tools of trade. And the tools of trade are no more status, like I said before, is what people need to do their work. If you want somebody to dig a hole, you must give the proper shovel or the proper spade for them to dig the hole. So if in ICT world, working from home means that you need the tools that will allow you to do so. I think, and most in government, I mean, I worked in government for over 8 years myself, and I know these are difficult discussions, because the people that must take the decisions around this are the people that actually have hold on this thing, thinking that I am senior, I must be seen getting cell phone allowance, I must be seen getting a laptop, carrying a laptop around and getting a cell phone. That is different from lower levels. But now all those needs to be cut down. And I'm actually very excited, because I'm also involved in the National Treasury RT15 a lot on this, on the shaping of it, especially around looking at the ICT gadgets as the tool of trade and forget about all other things. And when you do that, government is a big organization. The economies of scale will come very handy for the organization, for them to push down the rates, to push down the cost. I mean, I'm talking this from experience. When we're doing the October, November, and May, June exams for the university, I went straight to all the network providers. I spoke to Vodacom, I spoke to MTN, Telkom, and all of them. And I said, this is how much money we have. And we will need our students to write exams. We are talking about over 300,000 students that will write exams now. Put your rates at the level where we can afford. And it was a matter of take it or leave it. And everybody came to the party for that purpose. For the first time, yes, others started to have some stories, and then one of them showed them the way, and then they started getting greedy and they went back to do this thing. So as government, I'm saying this openly, let's play them against each other to get the best rates for devices, cell phones, for data, for laptops and anything else. As a government, if we go out and say we want devices of this particular spec at 5,000 Rand per device, we can be able to cover every employee of the organization. But we're still stuck on getting 30,000 devices to the elite and not covering the whole organization. So I say we all put our efforts together, we review our process of supply chain for us to be able to take advantage as a big organization, as government as we are, for us to be able to push down the rates, because they can push down the rates. We can get data to a very, very minimal amount of money, but we're not doing that because we are going as individuals. So, and not being a finance person, but I'm thinking if we all put forces around this, I am in ICT, I know that these things are possible, but we need to come in big numbers. One department alone will not make a difference. One national department alone will not make a difference. But if all spheres of government do the same thing and put together a solution that will drive data down, that will drive the devices and the tools of trade that government needs to give services to the society down, we are all going to succeed.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shabalala. Ms. Cohen, I think partly
Thanks.
that the last question also relates to you.
It does. May I speak from here, or do we have to move? Is it all right?
No, you may. No, you may.
Okay. I think it does. And the only thing I want to add, because I think what you articulated was absolutely spot on. The only thing I would add is that we've got to look at how budgets are moved around and reallocated. Because, I used the example of an individual in terms of how much they would have spent on getting to work and a potential transport subsidy. But if we look at the cost of air travel and the government budget on air travel, that's not being utilized to a large extent like it was, where you had a lot of ministers and officials constantly flying down to Cape Town or on international trips, meetings, conferences. There's a lot of money in there, and that could be reallocated in terms of digital access, which is really important. There was one question that I think referred to how do you actually get line managers to start managing performance rather than to manage by hours. And I think the example that was used on the chat was, for example, a cleaning contract. And that's where I think the role of HR is really important, because you've got to actually assist that line manager to define it. They don't have the capabilities to be able to do that in the way that an HR person does. And that's an HR person's role. So if you're looking at a cleaning contract, for example, and I'm assuming that it's an employee that's coming in to do the cleaning, but it could equally apply with a service provider, is that if it was a service provider, you would be saying, what space do you have to clean? What standards do you have to clean to? And in what period of time do you have to clean? Those are the key things that you would be asking. And in the same way, if it's an employee doing that, you ask the same questions. What are you responsible for cleaning? What is the time that you've got to do it in? And what is the standard to which you actually require to do that? Making sure that, of course, the person has the tools of trade in order to do that, because that's the requirement for them to be able to do their job properly, or that they're properly skilled to be able to perform their role. And so instead of saying to the cleaner who perhaps is cleaning this conference venue is that, I need you here from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m, what their brief is that they have to come in, they have to clean the venue, they've got to make sure that there's no things on the floor, they've got to make sure that all the desks are sanitized. You actually set the specifications. Now, that's an easy example, because I think we understand that work a little bit easier. It's not so easy when you're trying to work out what the data scientist's role is, and that's where your type of expertise comes in. But you getting to know what those roles are in the department or the area that you're responsible for is an essential part of you managing as well, because that's when you start realizing that someone's being completely underpaid or overpaid for the work that they're doing. And you can start bringing in a level of equality and equity in terms of pay as well. The other thing, and it's a very different issue, but I think it's important to speak to, is the whole issue of inclusivity. Because the digital world actually is in some respects a far more inclusive platform. Like we've sat on some Zoom calls or MS Team calls with ministers, and they sit in the same room as you. They're not sitting on the podium. They're not sitting in a special place. They don't have a special mute button that no one else has access to. It's much more. It's a much more equitable type of environment. But if you don't have that digital access, it's a much more inequitable environment, because you can't even start playing in the game and being part of it. The one thing that I encourage you to do, I spoke about communication and engagement. There was a tool that I was exposed to years and years ago in the physical dimension, which I've found incredibly useful in the virtual world. And that's where you watch in any meeting dynamics. It doesn't even have to be a meeting. It could be a social orientation. You watch who the people are that are speaking the most. And that is a very good indicator of people and their relative rank and power in the room. So it's the people that feel that they have voice that actually speak. So the one way, and often it is like it's in different environments, and you start developing a consciousness of it. But in some environments, you'll see that it's only the white males that are speaking. In others, it's only the people that go out drinking together that are speaking. In others, it's only the men that are speaking. Sometimes it's only this particular group, the finance people, that are speaking in a meeting, even though there's a whole lot of other people. And what I've tried to do very deliberately since I was exposed to this technique is both with my own practices when I'm chairing a meeting, but encouraging leadership who are chairing the meeting, is to ask for as many voices in the room as possible, because often some of the best ideas come from the people who are quiet, because they've actually been listening more than talking. But also it's an amazingly inclusive tool to bring people's productive capacity to the fore and to be inclusive. And on digital calls and things like that, it's so easy to do. So, even if it's just before the end of the meeting, go around the room if it's not too big. Hopefully it's not too big. And just ask people, is there anything else you want to add? Because often the most amazing things come through, but people start participating in a very different way. And you've got an opportunity there. So use it.
Thank you, Tanya. I will go back to the questions and take the next 5 questions. There are also questions in the WhatsApp group that both you and Ms. Shabalala have access to, if you want to respond to that after the next 5 questions, please. There's a question from Kagiso. Prejudice is very evident. What possible ICT strategies can be put in place to curb it? It is really affecting performance. I think, Ms. Shabalala, this is a question to you. A question to Ms. Cohen. Please advise on how best can we contract performance. Oh, you have responded to that, so I'm not going to repeat that, sorry. From Keith. Working from home allows you to focus on so much more without distractions, which occurs in the office of unplanned events. You also work much longer hours. Team members are more available after hours than in the office, as not confined to office hours or rushing for transport. Team members must be willing to take on or are willing to take on more work or responsibilities due to working remotely. Ms. Cohen, I think that relates to what you have spoken about, how we work from home. So this is a comment if you want to respond to that. From Cindy, what is DPSA's view on what Tanya has just said? Why do you need everyone to be at work? We are expected to function at 100% capacity except for employees with uncontrolled comorbidities. Maybe, Tanya, you could also just respond to us on that comment. It's not a question, just a comment. Then for Ms. Shabalala, we have seen a low uptake or success of deployed IT solutions within the public service. What would you propose we do differently this time around? What is your opinion on the alignment of business process improvement before the use of IT solutions? Thanks for an enlightening presentation. And then for Ms. Cohen, please assist on how to monitor performance of employees working remotely. I will let you answer these questions and then we may have time for a last round. Thank you, Ms. Shabalala.
I'm taking advantage now, having seen Tanya sitting down.
Not a problem at all, ma'am.
Thank you. I'll take the last one because that's the one I understood much better. The one on the low uptake of technology in government and the importance of business process improvement and process improvement in government. I think it's an old saying that garbage in, garbage out when it comes to ICT. So you cannot expect ICT to change or to solve problems that are made on processes that are not working well. So in many instances, when people are asking for solutions for technology, I'll always ask them, what is the as is? Because if you don't change the as is, whatever comes out will either embarrass you or make it more public to people what you've been doing, and you can continue doing it outside of ICT because at least it is within your control. So in answering the question, the major problem I've seen especially when I was working in government myself, of the low uptake of technology is the fear. Technology always comes with the fear of the unknown. So people are always scared of taking on new technology solutions because they don't know what it will do to their work, what it will do in what they were doing. Many people that take on technology very quickly are the people who are risk takers, the people who are not insecure in what they are doing. So a major part which has been found to be working much better now is change management. Technology is not just plug and play anymore. Technology is being laid way before by training, change management, getting buy-in, getting people to own up to the processes before technology can come in, make them hungry for the technology. So when it comes, it's fitting in exactly on what they've been expecting for. And business processes are very important. You can never have a technology that works on flawed business processes. So what I've been doing in my career life is that if there's a new solution, you always go back and say, what are the processes, what are the business requirements that will make this work? Once you've got that, then you map the processes end to end. Once you have mapped the processes, it's still not technology yet. Once you've made the process, they make sense to the person who's going to use them. Then you plug in technology to enable those processes online. And I think most of the things that we've been doing in the past as IT expert is to plug technology. Just plugging technology as if you're plugging technology in the server room. You need to have the human part. And that is the 90% success rate that you'll receive in adoption of technologies. But if you plug it and come back afterwards and start pushing and wanting to know why the technology is not adopted, you have missed the boat already in that regard. There was a question from Kagiso. I couldn't hear the proper word. Was it about prejudice? Prejudice. Oh, okay. Thank you. I know that many a times we actually want to solve human and behavior and attitude problems with IT. And it's so difficult. You cannot make a person to be more caring by introducing IT. You cannot make a bad manager a good manager by introducing IT. But what you can do is to assist in ensuring that facts are on the table. So to find a way of reducing the practice or the bad influence of prejudice is proper contracting from the beginning. and making sure that what I'm doing as an employee has got a clear direction as to how it assists on the vision of the organization or on the mandate of that particular department. If I don't see myself there, everything will fall. And I think technology with templates, with automated forms, it assists you not to make that a gray area. It takes away the gray area around it. It takes away subjectivity around it. It becomes facts. I'm supposed to make this coffee, and this coffee must have 2 teaspoons of sugar, and I must serve this coffee 2 or 3 times a day. That will not change, no matter how much you hate me. If I do this accordingly, and I've got evidence that I've put on the table, that's where then IT can help you. But it cannot change people's bad behaviors. It cannot change people's attitude and prejudice because now there is IT. It does make it less because it's not as open and as obvious, but it's always the subtle somewhere there. The politics of organization can never be solved by technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shabalala. Ms. Cohen, just before you come, I see there's another question that I think that is part of your set that I will include in your set now from Mali. Ms. Cohen, how does one manage the intrusive nature of remote working? Your team and supervisor could be dropping emails, appointments at awkward times without alerting you. This could cause problems both at work or home when you keep on checking your laptop. Thanks, Ms. Cohen.
Yeah, I'm going to deal with that one first because I think everyone is conscious of how intrusive it is into your home life. And I think, the one thing that gives me a little bit of confidence is that there's been a number of studies done around how productive you can be if you are available continuously as opposed to if you are available to work during reasonable hours. And there's this book called Peak Performance. I don't know if people have read it, which I just think is like, it's actually an amazing book. If you haven't, it's also another compulsory reading material. But one of the things that they show is that some of these big consulting houses that work like unbelievably out, like on sort of big hours and overnight and getting in assignments, like the company culture is actually like 7 days a week, 18, 20-hour days. And they've done studies of how they've put in place mandatory breaks. So the one firm, and I can't remember which consulting firm it was, but I think it was either Boston's Consulting Group or McKinsey's or one of those. And they said to them, you have to take off every Wednesday. And the team members and the team leaders and things were very, very anxious about it because it's completely contrary to the culture. And they just actually were really worried about how the clients would receive it as well, because the clients are used to on-demand delivery and you always being available. But they implemented it, and the performance rankings went up by 15% after doing that. And since then, what they've done is that they've instituted compulsory rest times because they realized actually it's better for performance overall. So I think part of your role is transformative as HR practitioners to actually show that people are better when they do have proper breaks, and that it's actually it's more productive to be doing that. I think the other question that was asked is around the requirement that everyone must now go back on site unless you've got uncontrolled comorbidities. And that one's a really difficult one because, it's easy for me to say, I don't agree with that, but I think you're working in a system where there are policies and you can't just disobey those policies because they've been set for a reason and they want to standardize things. But I think there's a way in which as HR practitioners, you play a transformational role. And that's where you've got to speak amongst yourselves as to how can this be managed differently? Because otherwise, all these disruptions that have come through COVID, which are actually in some ways positive disruptions, in other ways deeply unsettling, but we're not going to learn from them. And for me, it would be a great pity if after we've had the pandemic, as we go back to our old way of working, because everyone says this is not the only pandemic we're going to have. We're going to have more. And there's ways of working that have become better. and we've got to use those ways of working. So for everyone just to sort of revert to how we were doing things before, I think is not, it's not seizing the opportunity in terms of how do we grow from this experience as a country and as people, but also in terms of how do we work. And I think that we've really got to challenge ourselves constructively, and we've got to challenge others to take advantage of what those changes might bring. Because like you say, Poppy, it's a change management process. And that's your role as HR. I don't know if you saw on the presentation, I didn't speak to it, but Jim Collins speaks to the 3 roles of HR. The one is transactional, and it's day to day. The other is interventional, and you are managing processes and policies and systems. And the third is transformational. And that's really is how do you strategically transform the organization from the role that you do? You strategic partners. You're not just transactional, managing leave and managing time off and managing performance conditions at a distance. You actually have a transformational role. And part of your role during COVID is actually to shift the culture of how things are done, because we've got to seize that opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I would want to give both speakers an opportunity for just closing remarks once you have scanned through the comments and questions on the WhatsApp, and then each panel member just to make some closing remarks. And whilst you do that, I will give you the last question then, which I think is also relevant to both your inputs. The red tape in government funding fails in remote work resourcing due to the time it takes in decision-making. People work from home, but had to fund themselves to secure data, which sometimes force them to be brave, or I'm not sure that, and work in the office even though they are vulnerable, or to brave going to the office, and even though they are vulnerable. How did UNISA itself manage to secure laptops and data for students in such a short space of time? I know, Mr. Shabalala, you did speak about it. Maybe you can just expand a little bit about that. And then if each panel member can use 5 minutes to just make the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just start by answering the question that was asked, and I think it's a valid concern because our organizations are not agile enough in as far as being able to respond to crisis as the way that we have experienced it. I think what has assisted with the university is that we already had plans, we already have specifications and everything that was earmarked for the digitization of the university. Like I said in the presentation, that the COVID made us to parachute back what we were planning to achieve in 2030 to do it in 2020. And the fact that we had a plan, the fact that we already had funding for that plan assisted a lot. So it was just a matter of deciding what we were supposed to do in 2025 to do it in 2020 because the crisis is now. So we didn't have to go and look for budget for that because the plan was already funded. But it also assisted to have that strategic funding model that will assist in terms of ensuring that you don't go through a lengthy process when there's a crisis at hand. And I must say that also having availability online of the decision makers, because we needed to do about 2-3 committees of council in one day to get an approval, because we needed the data to be approved by end of the day. And it, according to the delegation of authority, it needed to go to council, but it needs to go through some committees of council. So we'll have a committee council in the morning, write minutes in an hour, send them to the next committee for them to recommend to the other committee and get approval by end of the day. And the secretariat must give us that recommendation, that the minutes of the approval in an hour for us to give to the service providers for approval the next day. So it really goes back to the agility of the organization in terms of its leadership and willingness to assist the university at any point in time. But no one will be willing to assist you if you don't have a plan. So you need to have a plan, and you need to have got that plan approved upfront. So in preparation for any other things to come, I believe that you need in your own organization, take this opportunity to go through what is required for staff to work from home and put it in your plans and get it approved. And when the time comes that you might need to do it on an agent basis, you don't have to start from scratch. And you might not also get to a situation when you are taken for the ride by the service providers, because they take advantage at that time when you are in need, especially. In terms of my comments, I just want to quote one of our employees at UNISA that kept saying, never let a crisis to go to waste. So don't only look at things as being gloom and doom. Take advantage of that situation and turn it around. Change lemon into lemonade. We have proven that we can survive this. Let's not relapse, like Tanya said. Let's not say now we go back, because going back was not good anyway, even before COVID. So COVID made us aware that we cannot continue doing things the way that we're doing them. So don't hope to go back. Build on what you have for a more improved future that will help both the organization as well as their employees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Shabalala. Ms. Cohen, your
Yeah,
last comments, and then colleagues, you can carry on.
No, I should have left Poppy to close, because I think she gave a perfect closure, but I'll leave some last minute thoughts. I think we've got to recognize, like, in a way, what some of the amazing things that have happened during COVID, that I don't know whether people have adequately taken stock of. So if you remember in the early stages of lockdown, how quickly the Command Council was making decisions, how quickly new pieces of legislation were coming out, how quickly the police were enforcing new pieces of legislation, how quickly people were adapting. It shows us what we can do. And I know that to some extent things have slowed down now, but it's really that energy and that agility that we've got to hold on to, because it means that the public service can be agile, and it actually can, it can work in a very, very different way. And that's the energy I think that we've got to hold on to. I think we've got to embrace the future of work and what it's bringing to us. There's just far too much that's positive there for us to just go back to our old ways of working. And you've got to be brave as HR practitioners, because it's not easy work. Transformational work, change management work, it's not as though this is plain sailing. It's not that you get on the wave and you ride it. This is roughy sea. And you actually, like, the rougher it is and the harder it is, that means that the change is actually much tougher to achieve. And that's when you know that actually you're doing something. So you've got to find ways to be internally resistant and resilient, because it isn't easy things that you are dealing with. But the way in which you build that resilience is by surrounding yourself with people who want to do the same things as you and who want to deliver change and want things to operate better. And I think, you know, the thing that it comes down to at the end of the day is you can't delegate responsibility everywhere else, and especially upwards. I think, you know, it's very easy to say we're waiting for instruction from the DG, from the senior, from the minister, we're waiting for the policy to change. And to a large extent, you are constrained by that. And I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. But there's a type of leadership which is problem-led leadership, which you need to take, is that you can solve problems that are within your sphere of control and start doing things differently. And I'm a firm believer that if you start doing those things a bit differently, is sometimes others start doing them, and you can actually start stimulating that change. You don't need to be the victim of others' decision-making, some of the inertia. And, you know, the fact is the public service is a massive employer. It's going to take a long, long time to shift some of these practices. But try to do things differently in your own sphere of control. Try and get a coalition of the willing, be it your line managers, your HR practitioners, the people that you're working with, and shift things as you can, because that's how you're going to make a difference in terms of the area that you're working in, and that's how you're going to add value. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. I'm going to ask Ms. Pendile Makwenazi now to thank our panelists. And after Ms. Makwenazi has thanked our panelists, I will ask the principal of the National School of Government to close today's masterclass for us with the final word. Thank you, Pindi.
Thank you. This has been a very exciting time to listen to you and listen to the ideas that came about here. I looked at some of the comments from the colleagues thinking that these things are not possible, we are not ready as the public service to implement some of the ideas shared here. I think that what the NSG is trying to do by bringing you to talk to us is to help us to think differently and to also imagine that we can do the changes that we've been forced to implement in the public service anyway. So how do we do it smarter, much better as the HRD coordinators and practitioners? We are in control, we can influence the policies, so let's embrace the kind of knowledge sharing that we've experienced here. It's been good for us and we can change the things that are there and make them better. We'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us and share your knowledge. On behalf of the NSG, we've got some little gifts for you to say we appreciate your time that you spent with us. May you be blessed by having shared your skills. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pindi. Much appreciated. We will now allow our principal, Mr. Nzaweni, to close the session for us.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for allowing me to greet you. I'm not sure if you can hear me. If you can't,
Yes,
please let me know.
Principal, we can hear you.
You can. Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yes.
No, thank you very much. Chairperson of this session. Both of you, yourself and Stephen was chairing. Earlier. We much appreciate your stewardship of the program today, as it has been unfolding since this morning. I was tuning in from time to time whilst engaged in another meeting. I must thank everybody who presented since the first presentation at 9 in the morning, which was the deputy minister, and then our CFO, Dino, and everybody else who made the presentation, and in particular the two colleagues who gladly agreed to come and share with us their perspectives during this masterclass. We do appreciate, Tanya, that you were able to come. We also appreciate that Poppy was able to come to share these very vital perspectives that you have shared with everybody this afternoon. As I said, I was listening in from time to time, and I was able to catch some of the important interventions that you were making, and we much appreciate that. But in particular, I want to thank all the colleagues who are attending this session today since this morning, and in particular those who are attending the masterclass. I see the numbers were ranging between 250 and 60 people at different times. As our CFO said just now, Ms. Pindile Mkwanazi, The idea of bringing master classes to these ones, other than just to add, other than just to add some fire and energy into a PSTF arrangement, we do these master classes because we are hoping that we can bring some valuable knowledge into the conversations that are taking place inside the public service. Because as we know, COVID had an impact on any organization, regardless of whether it was public or private, but indeed those in the public sector had peculiar characteristics. And so just as in government, we have public servants who are at lower levels, and as a consequence, they do not qualify for laptops, they don't qualify for data. In the private sector as well, in call center environments, call center agents don't qualify for some of those things. But as case will be, most call centers today are working from home, which means that those who are operating call centers have had to invest resources to buy devices and data and other tools of trade to enable remote working. Similarly, in government, many departments have been purchasing technology, giving it to public servants. It's not universal yet. However, the amount of access is increasing because the COVID pandemic has forced that we change the manner in which we grade employees and decide who qualifies for a device and who doesn't. But also, as indicated in the presentations made, especially the one by Tanya, as more and more people are working remotely in the public service, is a highly regulated environment, and people are still expected to perform and that to be supervised, and we must record their output because it will be audited. And now we are aware that there will be technologies that can be used to manage remote work. But in particular, as our Minister Senzo Mkhunu has been arguing a lot recently, that whether or not we make a decision to give people technology, we allow for greater remote work to happen, and so on. At the end of the day, his principal question is, how are all these new arrangements impacting on service delivery? So to the extent that we have got HR practitioners here who write policies and make recommendations about remote work, peculiar to your workspace. You also coordinate with other colleagues to decide who gets a device and who doesn't get a device. It is equally important that as HR practitioners, we need to be asking certain critical questions faced with the decision to buy 100 devices, but you have to buy 100, but there's demand for 200. We are arguing that HR practitioners, as Tanya indicated, must be seen as strategic partners who must be part and parcel of a conversation about who must get the device, so that we are not just custodians of policy only, but to take that strategic role, as Nopopi was indicating, that in deploying technology at UNISA, training was a key aspect of it, because we needed to enable people to be able to use the technology they have. And at the end of the day, the success of the deployment of technology is seen or felt by the students, which is the clients they are servicing. And in the public sector, we've got people who need to access those services. As we all aware, over 2 million people were able to access the grants of the 250 rands grant during the COVID pandemic. Those people were processed by SASSA using SSD, using WhatsApp line, and they were able to successfully apply for it. Yes, there were just less than 1% cases of people who got the money who should not have gotten it. But the fact of the matter is that COVID and the new normal made a leap, forced departments like those ones to make a leap where historically people who will have queued outside a government department were still able to apply and successfully be able to access the grants using some of the most basic actually of technology available, such as SSD and WhatsApp. So under the new normal and going forward, as the master classes have indicated, and also I noted the comments earlier on in the discussion about professionalizing the public service, We have hope as the National School of Government that when ourselves, with our family, and our family is everyone who's here, because HR practitioners in the public sector are part and parcel of the extended family of the NSG. We will not succeed unless we work and collaborate with you. And we are hoping that we'll be able to make an influence that directs the pace and scale at which we should provide training and capacity building support to public sector workers so that they can be able to adapt under the new normal, provide services to the public, but most importantly, that they must grow, because professional growth has to be a standard pursued by all of us, because public servants are not machines. They are people with aspirations to grow. They must grow professionally, and therefore training, interventions, and conversations such as this one are necessary in that regard. Once again, we are humbled by your trust in us and this process. We thank our two presenters, Ms. Cohen, also for bringing the ILO experience. We thank our Ms. Poppy Shabalala as a CIO of the University of the Land, as we call it, and there I'm declaring my interest there as a member of council at UNISA, that the University of the Land, with the largest numbers of students, that was able to make the leap. We thank you for coming here to bring the perspectives that you have shared here. And thank you to all those who were steering the program since this morning. Thanks to the colleagues in the EU who have supported this kind of program. All of you will be getting a lot more information and invitations from us. Please do take time, spend 2 hours in some of these master classes. They will help you go through content that otherwise would have taken you months if you were to buy a book and read it. Thank you once more and have a good evening. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Denise. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Principal. And just a reminder, we will be sending you the presentations tomorrow via email, all the presentations. And thank you very much, Principal.